these days it seems like everybody wants to buy their own land. And I get it because people were cooped up in the cities during the pandemic. And if you're able to go out in the country and get a piece of land like this for yourself to enjoy with friends and family, I mean, that'd be a really good way to spend some of that extra money to invest it for long-term appreciation and enjoy the natural scenery while you're waiting. But what's funny is that when you actually do that for the first time, and if you don't know what you're doing when you buy that land, you're going to make a big mistake. And if you make that big mistake, it's going to cost you money. And not just like a couple $100, like it can cost you thousands or tens of thousands of dollars if you don't know what you're doing. But the good news for land buyers, especially if you're relatively new, if you're buying land for the first time, or if you could use a little bit more guidance in the process of buying land, the good news is that there's 10 rules of buying land. And if you know what those 10 rules are, it makes it a lot less likely that you're going to make a really damaging mistake in the process, which is great because buying land, it's all about making money, having fun outside, and enjoying the property that you own. And so if you follow these rules and know what these rules are, it's going to make it a lot more likely that you're going to be successful. So in this video, what I'm going to do is talk about the 10 rules of buying land. And for each and every rule that I introduce, I'm going to start with a story about a property that I personally had a transaction or an experience with, firsthand experience that really illustrates each of the 10 different rules. And once the story concludes, I'm going to tell you exactly what the rule is and then how to make sure that you're following that rule so you can be really confident about the land that you're buying. So the first property that I want to share a story about is a 12.5-acre piece of farmland in Bladen County, North Carolina. Now this is a pretty cool property because when you actually look, it's down a half-mile dirt road, and you go from that dirt road into a big open clearing where at least half of the property, maybe 7 or 8 acres, is like really high quality farmland. And it's fenced in by a wall of trees around the perimeter of the farmland, which stages a future home site really nicely. So I think the property's terrific. And especially with the drive up access, it doesn't have to be farmland forever. You could actually have a farmhouse on that property too. You could keep most of the farmland in service and you could plant crop or lease it out to a farmer and have a really nice home there as well. What's interesting about this property is that as we started getting into it, there was a dirt road to get to the property, the one I mentioned earlier. It's called John Wooten Road, and it actually has a street sign. So out on the main county asphalt road, when you turn into that subdivision, there's a street sign for John Wooten Road. And so it's like, okay, that's the road, that's the address of the property, no issue, right? Well, what ended up happening is that when we actually looked through the public records on this particular piece of land, we couldn't find a description of that easement, of that right-of-way in the deed of that property. The reason that matters is because when you're using a private right-of-way, basically it's like a road that cuts through private property, and that's what John Wooten Road was. And the challenge is you got to make sure that if you're going through someone else's property, whether or not there's a street sign, that you actually have the rights to do that. And the only way you know that is by pulling the easement documentation from the county office. So when we went onto the deed and we reviewed the deed in detail, what we found out is that there was really no right-of-way description in the legal description of the property, which was a bummer. But then we figured, okay, maybe we can find it in an old plat map. So we went and found an old survey map from, I think, the late 80s. And it actually showed that driveway, that road on the map, and it mapped it as, quote, old farm road. It's like an old farm road on the property. So at first it was like, okay, there's documentation on this right-of-way, but then when you actually look into it, all it was a farm road. Because when you have a legal right-of-way on a survey map, what ends up happening is that the surveyor has to document that. The way that they document a right-of-way is by really highlighting the right-of-way with a dotted perimeter, dotted line, and then also indicating the book and page number where you can actually pull the easement records from the county office. So we didn't have that. All we had was this old farm road, and so I don't know exactly what that does for us in terms of legal access. What we actually had to conclude on this property is despite the fact that there was signage for this road, it was landlocked. And so the property that we're looking at here would have probably been worth $50,000 or maybe $60,000 as a single family home site if you had the legal access, but without it, it's basically landlocked from the standpoint of that easement. So because of all that, conservatively, the property's probably worth about 20 grand. The funny thing is, you know, we were under contract to buy it for like 18,000, and we were thinking we were getting a good deal, but at the end of it, what ended up happening is like we had to not only try to renegotiate to a lower price, but when the seller wasn't able to meet us at that lower price, there's a farmer that owns a few hundred acres of farmland on the other side of that property that actually has road access on the county road on the other side to the west. So we tried to, without making any money at all in the process, we tried to get the farmer involved to see if he would want to buy the property, because we're thinking, hey, if we can sell it for 20 and we can't buy it for 10, there's not going to be enough margin in the deal for us to take the risk. And so if we can just get the seller the outcome that he's looking for, that'd be ideal. And so we contacted the farmer, and the farmer's like, yeah, it's landlocked, I'll pay 20K for it. So the farmer, it's really funny, the farmer actually knew the game, he knew the property, and he knew the family. But what's so funny is that the guy that was the owner of the property that we're trying to buy, he was like the same name as the guy that the road is named after. And so the John Wooten Road, that was like his grandfather. And so the grandson was the guy that was trying to sell this property that had access on a road that was named after his grandfather. Like, it's literally the guy, that's his name, and that's the road. But the road is no good because it didn't have the documentation for that easement. So the first rule of buying land is that a private road is only as good as its paperwork. What I mean by that is that a private road is going to have two features to it, and all access has two basic features to it when you're talking about access for land. Number one is legal access. Legal access is, can I get to the property without illegally trespassing through my neighbor's property? The other form of access is physical access. Physical access is, can I get there by car? So we had physical access here, no problem. The road wasn't in the best shape, but there's no issue. In fact, farmers have been using that farm road to actually plant that field back there, and so they didn't really have an issue getting in and out, even with heavier equipment than like a standard sedan or like pickup truck. They were in there with tractors. But you know, the funny thing is, like, the physical access was there, but the legal access wasn't. And the way that you want to check this is when you're actually using a private road, the key to a private road, whether or not it has a sign, is do you actually have the right to use it? So a private road, the legal access underneath the physical road is going to come through in the form of an easement. The easement should show up in one of a couple different places, and you want to look for it in the Register of Deeds and to find this documentation. The first place you're going to find an easement is in the deed of the property you're buying, because the easement is going to describe a meets and bounds description, which is basically like a mapping, a technical mapping description of the easement. That's like maps the easement using only words. And so they talk about latitude and longitude, and it gets like very technical, but that's what a meets and bounds description is. So you want to look for that on the deed, and if you don't have that, you want to look on the survey maps of not only the subject property, but any property in the subdivision that that private road goes through. The other thing you want to look for is an easement agreement, and an easement agreement is basically a long form document that describes the easement, its location, and also like the rules of who gets to use it and who doesn't get to use it. Because a private right-of-way is exactly that. It's a right-of-way through private property that you can use at the behest of the people whose property the easement goes through. So you really want to be aware of that. And even though the road is in your name or in the seller's name, it doesn't necessarily mean that the easement is all it's cracked up to be. So the second property I want to tell you about is this property. It's in South Carolina. There's a guy that bought this piece of land. It's about an acre. And he bought it like the year before we had talked to him. So he bought it at like $25,000. And what happened, it was really tragic. His wife died. And so he had a real financial distress. So even though he had paid 25 grand for the property the year before, he was trying to really like get out of the property when he found us. And we had sent him an offer in the mail. We talked to him and he was willing to sell it to us at $10,000 if we could close it in like 4 weeks. And that made sense. I mean, like, I was excited about it because even if we pay all the closing costs on both ends of the deal, that's still really good value for us. And so we agreed to buy the land for 10 grand. And as we normally would, we sent out for a soil report on the property just to make sure that the soil was usable for septic. But we got the soil report back. The soil report came back bad. It wasn't good. And what we found out is that that land was totally unsuitable for conventional septic. And so we had to, if we built on that home land at all, or if any future buyer were to build a home, you know, a conventional septic system's like $7,500 or something, but an engineered aerobic drip system, which is the only type of system that you could use here, is going to be like 35 grand. So it's like another, what, 30K, give or take, in installation costs. And then there's an annual maintenance of like $500 or more. So ultimately, this land that we thought was worth 25K, it wasn't worth 25K. It wasn't even worth 10K in some cases. So the thing is, like, what was really weird is that we ended up seeing, when we pulled the septic history on this property, we pulled the septic application from the time that the seller had bought that land the year before. And his name was like on the paperwork of the application. And what we found is that there was a denied septic permit on file with the county. And we asked him about it, and he was like, what? What denied permit? Yeah, we applied, but I never heard anything back. So he ended up going through his email, and in his email, what he found out was that there was like a buried email in his inbox from the county office, the environmental health office, with the denied septic permit, and also the realtor he was working with, and I guess the home builder for the manufactured home company that was helping him with the property. They were on the email too, and like nobody replied, no one said anything, and that came through before he actually bought the land, and everybody around the table let him buy that land and let him send the wire out at $25,000 to buy a property that a year later he couldn't even sell for 10. And the rule that this brings up is the second rule of buying land, which is that 80% of land value is soil. You know, when you talk about soil and land value, it's very basic, because if you have wetlands on a property like this, wetlands can both increase or decrease the value of a piece of property depending on the context of the wetlands. For example, if I had a property like this that backed up to a pond, and the pond didn't get in the way of my site plan, well, the pond would actually help the property value, because it creates some ambiance, it's a water feature, and it's like, you know, not all property has this type of scenery to it. So that type of wetlands would actually help you, as long as you could build a home on the other part of the property. But when you have wetlands across an entire property, you can't build anything, really. Not really. I mean, look, you go to North Jersey, you go from Philly to New York, and you see all the development, all the highways that cut through the wetlands up there. And like, it was a different time. There's a lot of roads through wetlands. There's a lot of buildings through wetlands, but they've tightened the screws. And today, for the average person buying land, you know, if you have wetlands on your property and you have to put a home in the wetlands, it's basically a showstopper. Now, what's funny is that this is not wetlands, but wetlands is still soil. And what's interesting is that even if you don't have any wetlands on the property, like this land didn't have wetlands, the issue wasn't wetlands, but it's still a soil issue, because when you're outside of the city, to be able to build a home, you have to install a septic system. But to do that, the septic system basically works in two phases. One is the septic tank. This is what everybody knows. It's like a tank. You can put it anywhere. You can put it underground. The soil has no real bearing on the tank, because the wastewater comes from the home into the tank, where it's pre-treated before going to the second part of the septic system, which is called a drain field. A drain field takes the pre-treated wastewater and it puts it into a underground series of drain lines, basically a series of trenches underground, because what happens with wastewater is, if you don't have a sewer line to pump it to a sewer treatment facility, you're really relying on the natural engineering of the soil where the septic system is located. Soil, and I'm going to say this, and I want to be clear, because I get a lot of people that like argue and bicker in the comments about this because they don't understand what the big deal is about soil. And I do, because I've lived it. The big deal about soil is that you have to have certain drainage in the soil to actually install a septic system. Because what soil does naturally is a level of engineering to purify water. That's a level of advanced engineering of water purification that is way more advanced than anything that we can engineer in a lab. Soil is the ultimate technology for purifying water and managing wastewater on a property. But when you have a high water table, when you have shallow soil depth to rock, when you have wetlands, when you have expansive clay mineralogy, when you have soil that does not drain, then the drain field can't work. And even if you use an aerobic drip system or a mound system or these types of alternative systems, they still have standards for the type of soil depth that you need and the area where you need it. So ultimately, if you don't have 18 to 24 inches of usable soil depth, you can't use a conventional system. And if you don't have 12 inches of usable soil depth, you can't use one of these engineered systems. So you're really SOL, and soil on a property that looks like this, on a piece of land that you love, that you fall in love with, you can't see whether or not the soil is going to work for septic until you send a soil scientist to the property. And when you get the results back, if you can put a conventional septic, the property may be worth 50 grand, for example, but that same property where you can't install a subsurface septic system might be worth 8 or 10K. And it's the same exact land in the same exact location. And soil is 80% of the game when you're talking about land values. So this next property is about a half acre out in the country of Sampson County, North Carolina. And it's kind of a narrow shaped property. It's about a half acre, but it's kind of cute. Like when you look at it from street level, you can kind of picture a nice home there. It's got good curb appeal. And because it's cleared up front, it sort of saves some of the startup costs if you were to build a home there. So that's good. But when you actually look on the county maps, you can kind of start to see that like it looks like there might be an encroachment from the neighbor to your west. Because on the GIS maps, you can kind of see like their home, it almost like comes across the property line. So it's like, uh-oh, do we have an encroachment issue here? Are they building on our property? The other thing is that when we were trying to dig into this, we actually tried to find if there was like a survey map. We dug into the survey map of this subdivision. What we found out is like it was a very well laid out platted subdivision. And our property in that plat was lot 9. And the home or the lot next to us was lot 8. So the relevance of this is when we looked closely at lot 8, what we found is like there was a little box in like the front of lot 8. It looked like it was kind of coming towards our property. And we didn't know what that box was because it looked like the survey, didn't really describe it. But when we looked on Street View, it looked like that box was actually a family cemetery. So we were like, oh shoot, is this like how's this gonna work? Is this cemetery like on our land too, plus the home? Like that's not good. And you can actually see the cemetery from Street View. There's like a tombstone, so that's there, and that's not going anywhere anytime soon, folks. But what was interesting is like when you actually look on the GIS maps of this property, what you find is that like it looks like the fences on the backyards of the neighborhood, all the homes in the neighborhood, they're all like a little bit off of where they show the boundary lines. And so it's like if the GIS maps show the boundary lines a certain way, then like why is there an error like uniformly across the board shifted out in one direction? Like what gives and what's the deal? Well, what ended up happening on this one is we actually got a surveyor to go out to the property to lot 9, the one we're trying to buy. And we were under contract at like $3,200, by the way, so we got a good deal. But then so we got the surveyor out, not to do a full survey, but to actually shoot the western boundary line straight from the front to the back. And what that's called is a partial boundary survey, where a partial boundary survey is a surveyor, like they don't look at the entire perimeter. They basically take a look at one or two sides of a property. The reason they do that is like to see if you have an encroachment or to see if you have a boundary issue on one side where there's like evidence to suspect it. But what was funny is what we found out is that the GIS was wrong, because when the surveyor got back to us, what he told us was that there's no encroachment. The home does not cross to the property line. The cemetery does not cross to the property line. There is no encroachment from the western boundary line of our property on lot 9. And it's a good reminder that GIS isn't always accurate. And it's also a good reminder of rule number 3, which is know your boundary lines. Know your boundary lines, folks. The whole GIS thing, you kind of take for granted its accuracy. You find out it's not always what it's cracked up to be. And what's funny is I talked to a surveyor once about GIS and how this dynamic works. And he was like, well, Alex, you know what GIS stands for, right? And I was like, no, what does GIS stand for? And he goes, get it surveyed. And I was like, get it surveyed. I like that. That's pretty good. I haven't heard that. So Yeah, GIS, guys, it stands for Geospatial Informatics System or whatever, but it really stands for Get It Surveyed. The lesson there is that if you have a GIS map, that's not a survey map. They're different. And if you have a disagreement between the survey and the GIS, trust the surveyor. They're actually qualified to call the shots and tell the difference. You know, a plat map or a survey map on file with the county is going to show you a lot of this documentation. You can pull these typically for free from the Register of Deeds. And the survey, the boundary survey, is the process of basically recertifying the boundaries of a property. There's really no issue in getting a new survey map done on a property that that you're buying that already has a survey map. And there's reasons to do it. I think it's like if you have a bigger investment, the argument is a little bit more compelling. If you're buying a property that was recently surveyed, or like you can kind of see and walk the boundaries, and you have plat maps and documentation from previous surveys, I like to avoid surveys myself. That's not a recommendation. That's just I'm telling you what I do, because they can be expensive and take time. And so it's just one of those things where at the right moment, you can definitely make the investment. But you can also walk the boundary lines yourself, because typically there's going to be iron rods in the ground. And you can actually rent or buy a cheap metal detector like on Amazon. You can go out there and like, pardon me, you can go out there and you can walk the corners yourself. And when you get to the corners, you can use an app like LandGlide, like a GPS app that can kind of put you on a map of the property. When you get close to the corners with a metal detector, you can actually detect where the irons are. So they should be exposed on the ground, or sometimes if the soil's eroded or there's like some runoff, you can actually like dig in and like kind of with your hands or with a shovel or whatever, get in there and find the iron. So just be aware of that. The irons are there. Like they're hard to move. They're not easy to move. And so in theory, you can actually walk those boundaries yourself. And I'd recommend that you do. All right, so this next one was such a cool property. It was like a 22-acre farm property, and it's been in the same family for so many years. And that's part of the problem, as it turns out, because when we got the soils back, the soils looked so good on this one. And we were like under contract to buy it at like $44,000, something crazy. Because with the soil map and everything, we're thinking like the actual market would have been closer to something like 120. So we're thinking that this was going to be a home run deal. And the only wrinkle in it was that the seller was actually, the guy on the deed who was the owner, was the grandfather of the person we were talking to. So his granddaughter was our point of contact, and the grandfather owned that property in his name. And ultimately, he owned it in an estate. Hydrate, folks. It's important. He owned it in an estate, and the way he set it up was that the property would naturally pass down to his children, and then when they died, his grandchildren. We were at the point where it was 2 generations removed, and so there was 9 grandchildren that had to sign. What ended up happening is like our point of contact was one of the grandchildren, and she could rally like the other 4 or 5, but there was like 3 outstanding grandchildren that had to sign. One was dead. So we had to go and like find out their children, their adult children, like the great grandchildren, and like we actually had to track one down. We went down this path of like actually trying to do this and like line up a bunch of signatures. And like one of these like great grandchildren, like we like tracked her down to like, we like found her on Facebook, and then she was like ghosting me for a couple months. And she ended up like, we tracked her down to like a Foot Locker in like Timonium, Maryland. It's like last like known workplace. We're like, we called the Foot Locker. We're like, hey, like, is Rhonda there? Like literally. And then like she wasn't, but we found her and she was like willing to sign, but then she had questions, but then she said it was cool, but then she disappeared for a while. And then like one of the other grandchildren who like was ready to sign, like just died without an estate. They like died like during this whole endeavor. And what that did is it like created a scenario where their death meant that like their ownership passed on to like their descendants, like their, living spouse or children. And like, I hope you're sitting down, but they didn't have a will or an estate. So it had to go through a probate, but they weren't set up for that. Guys, rule number 4 is all the heirs have to sign. Okay? All the heirs have to sign what? The deed, the thing. Guys, when you are really in the process of buying land, especially on the East Coast, especially in the Southeast, especially in some of these old markets, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Maryland, what ends up happening is a lot of times you're dealing with an heir where they're not really the owner, they're like a part owner, but their grandfather, grandmother like owns the property in their name, and it's what's called heir property. There's billions of dollars of heir property in the United States right now that will never sell. And it will never sell because all the heirs have to sign. And it's not as easy as, hey, like, you know, I'm the granddaughter, I'm the one paying the taxes, but yeah, everybody's ready. See, everybody's ready to sign that they know about. But what happens is when you have a grandfather that dies, every generation that passes, the inheritance gets exponentially more complicated if there's no will or estate. Because what happens is that when they die, there's like a legal precedent in every state for how it passes to their children or grandchildren. But then if they die, then it like forks off and each child has multiple children and then they get married. The children get married. And then it's like that person, but then they got divorced. And then it's like, when did they get divorced? But they had kids. It's like, did they have kids when they were, like, guys, like literally this is the game. We've done these. We've done these with a couple heirs and we've done these, you know, on a couple times and we can get through probate. We've done all this stuff. But all the heirs have to sign. And when you have 9 heirs and some are deceased and some are in timonium, some are in prison, some we don't know about, you need every single heir. And that process is really complicated. And so when you get a property where you're not talking to the owner, rule of thumb, if there's more than 3 heirs, just don't do it. It's not worth it. I've saved you the time, and that's my story. So now the next property, this one I like this one. This is a 10-acre in Pitt County, North Carolina, which is where Mr. Beast lives, I think. Not on this property, but in this county, this rural county in North Carolina is the permanent residence of the largest YouTuber in the world. So for whatever that's worth, I'll leave that there. This is a 10-acre property in Pitt County on North Carolina State Road 11 in Grimesland. And what's funny is like the property had been surveyed in years past. And what was relevant is that the property, it actually sits west of the property in front of it. And on the northern boundary of the property that's in front of it to the road, you have a right-of-way that comes from the main road. That right-of-way is for ingress and egress and also for utilities, because if you were to build a home in the back, you don't have road frontage. So what you would have to do, it's septic and well, most likely. It's definitely septic, and I think you had to do a well here. And even if there's water on the street, on the asphalt, to extend the water line, it might not be worth it, honestly. But it's such a beautiful property. Look at these photos. Look at these aerial photos. It's so nice. It's like a nice like recreational home site. So, you know, and the power needs to be extended because the power belongs to the power company, but then as a service, they extend it to your property. The person that was in front of us enjoyed power service at that warehouse location that they owned and operated. And we had the easement to extend power to the back, and so that's fine. But what ended up happening was that when we actually called the power company, I think it was to Dominion Power, they were like, yeah, we don't have an easement. We're like, what? They're like, yeah, we don't have an easement. We need an easement. For what? For power. It's like, no, it's like, okay. I think I'm like educating them. I'm like, oh, no. It's fine. See this survey map? Yeah, there's a survey map of the property where if you look at the right-of-way that was approved and reviewed by the county zoning office, everyone like agreed and they looked at it and they signed. And in that easement, what they said was that it's a access for ingress and egress and utilities. And you guys are utilities, so we're good. And they were like, no, like we need an easement. I don't know like who did that. Like we need an easement with us. I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, to extend power, like I don't know anything about that map. So we need our own document that says that we can extend power because that's your neighbor's property. Even if there's some easement that was done in like 20 years ago, You know, we need to be able to kind of figure it out on ourselves. They need their own document. So I embarked on a process of, prior to buying this land, you know, the home site for a future home, like the home is no good without the power. So even if we can get septic and well, like we need to be able to extend the power line through that easement. And we thought that we had the right to do that in the survey map, but apparently we didn't. I actually found the son of the owner of the property up front because he had like a contractor's license in North Carolina. So I cold called him. He told me that his mom was the decision maker, which when I talked to her, I knew was the case. And so I appreciated that handoff. And I explained about the easement, and she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, no, that's fine. We'll help you out. We'll sign the thing. We'll talk to Dominion Power, and we'll just sign the easement. How about that? Great." I get a call back like a week later, and then she changed her tune. She's like, "Actually, are you flipping that land? Because like, what if we just bought it?" I was like, "Hey, like that works with me. I mean, if you want to give us a good number, we can wholesale it to you, and we can buy it from the seller, and then we can turn it to you back to back on like a double close." And she's like, "Great." And she had like a price where she was going to pay us. And then without having to go through all the easement, we could have made like a quick 10 grand. And so it's like, okay, that seems fair. But she's like, "Yeah, let me look at the property first. Send me the photos, send me the aerials." I sent her the aerials. She looked at the property. And then her thing was like, "Yeah, I don't know. The soils like aren't that good. I talked to my soil guy, my geotechnical guy. There's problems with the soil back there." I'm like, "Are there?" Like that didn't come up with us. Like, what are the problems? She's like, he's a very technical. He just tells me yay or nay. And he's just like, "Yeah, this one's no good." I'm like, "Okay. So do you want it?" She's like, "No. Well, no. I was like, "All right, but like you'll still help us with the easement, right?" "Of course, yeah. Of course." Like, "Okay, cool." And then she's like, "Oh no, but just, send me to Dominion Power and we'll work it out." "Oh, but let me get my attorney to review it first." I was like, "Attorney? Okay." And then I connected the attorney with the Dominion Power people, and I checked back in a week. "Hey, did your attorney look at it yet?" Like, "Hey, did your attorney have a chance to review the easement agreement? Hey, did you have a chance to sign the piece of paper? Like, what did your attorney say?" No follow-up. And there was no attorney. Like, there was no attorney. Like, there was no cooperation. It was just a smokescreen because the neighbor, like, didn't want to help us. Like, she wouldn't roll over in bed for us if it, like, inconvenienced her for a second. And that's just the truth. And because the idea of this easement being set up and documented to the satisfaction of everybody, including the county zoning officials, was not the issue. The issue was that the power company needed the easement. And so, like, it's weird because it was like already set up that way, but she pretended like she was going to help and she wasn't, because she doesn't care. She doesn't care about our scenario. And if she could have the privacy and the buffer in the back, like, she'll just lie. She'll just say she's going to help, but there's no intention of helping, because the fifth rule of buying land is don't count on favors when you don't know the neighbors. Guys, this relates to utilities. Obviously, it relates to access too. But a lot of times when you're extending utility service, or when you're having to cross through private property of other people that own that land in front of you or around you, you're basically counting on a level of cooperation from your neighbors that may or may not already exist. And if it's not set up with the documentation and the access that you need, then like don't count on the favor at the drop of a hat from someone that doesn't know you from Adam and like doesn't want to like go along with your scenario, because they just don't care. Like, they have their thing, and it's a little selfish. It's like a medium amount selfish. It's selfish. It's like just like fully selfish. And I'm gonna get some comments of like, "Yeah, dude, like you don't know what it's like. It's like, yeah, man, you don't live in the country. Like, I've lived in the country." It's like, dude, like, am I naive to say like it's like reasonable and like the neighborly thing to do when the plat map on a subdivision that you live in, on a 10-acre property that already affords you plenty of privacy, there's a fence line around the warehouse that they own, and the easement is outside the fence line. So it's like, just sign it. Like, what is the issue? People get so revved up. Like, "Oh, you don't know. You don't want neighbors back there coming and going." It's like, dude, just like let them build a home. Literally, it's fine. but not everybody agrees. And the people that don't agree are what are called neighbors. And the agreement that you are requiring from them that doesn't exist is called a favor. And we know how that's going to play out if you're relying on it. So you got to make sure that if you are extending utilities through private property, you have to go to the utility companies and you got to make sure before you buy that land of one thing, which is, can I get utilities without having my neighbors sign a piece of paper? It is the neighbors signing a piece of paper that is what you want to watch out for. Where there's pieces of paper that have been signed, are those good? Now, if I have to sign a piece of paper, that's fine. I would expect it. In fact, I want to sign that piece of paper with you, Mr. Power Company. But if you have to get a signature on a piece of paper from a neighbor who doesn't know you or care about your scenario, what you're going to find out is that that's one of like the hardest things to do in the world, is obtain the legal cooperation from someone who doesn't know who you are. So I would recommend that you make sure that you have what you need prior to buying that land, because you're not going to get that favor, especially when you're relying on it most. So these are two properties, two 13-acre lots, totaling 26 acres in Calhoun County, Florida. We're really excited about these because we got them under contract at $130,000. And we're thinking we could sell them each for like 100 a piece. And so we maybe make 80 to 100 grand on these properties, because we saw some price signal in the market. Some of the acreage properties that are similar size nearby were selling for like, 100, 120. But when we actually drilled into it on this one, what we found out is that a lot of the properties around us were on this stretch of road that was like pretty barren, pretty sparsely populated, mainly because the soil actually wasn't that good. And so a lot of these tracts of land had been bought and sold, but like they couldn't be built on. So there was a lot of comps in our area, in our backyard, of property that like wasn't, like the prices were like way lower than we would want to see. And these comps were really close to us. One was this like 10.4 acre comp that sold at 83 grand. Another one was at 13.4 acres, sold for 99. And so we're thinking, man, like there's a listing, I think it was like at 80K, that like wasn't even moving. There's like a very similar property that was listed at 80 grand that just wasn't selling. And we were like, okay, not good. We can't do this. And so, what we realized is like, we need to be in a position where like we'd have to be able to sell these at like 80 grand and not get hurt, not lose our shirt. So if we're paying 65 and we might have to sell it at 70 or 80, we're going to break even and probably lose money when we pay for commissions and everything. So it's really not safe. And that's the sixth rule of buying land. The sixth rule of buying land, guys, is if you can't sell the land for what you paid, then you're paying too much for it. See, when you actually buy property, the important thing, even if you don't plan on selling it, is to be an effective buyer. You always have to look through the eyes of a seller, and you have to understand what the seller is going to see, because that seller might be you one day. And so ultimately, if you have to go and sell that property, you want to know what you can get for it, who's the buyer is going to be, and what that buyer is actually going to pay. Because, when we have a system for pricing land, we value land obviously before we buy it. We have a 5-step system that's called CRASS, CRASS. And the C stands for close. It's what's close, what's recent, what's average, what's similar, and what's selling. And the close is the first letter of that system, because the value of your land is primarily going to be driven off of the properties right around you. So it's not about the quarter mile down the road, the neighborhood listing, the nice home in the other neighborhood. It's about like literally, if you walk out of your front door, if you walk to the front of that property and you look around, everything you see around you is close. And if you can't see it, it's not close. And so understand that when we look at the value of land, you can't be romantic. You have to look at the data. And if the data for nearby sold comps does not support the price that you think the property is worth, and if you would have to sell it for less than you want to buy it for, you shouldn't buy it, because ultimately it's not going to work out for you. And I'll just save you that pain, because I felt it myself. So that's the 6th rule. I forgot to say this earlier, so I'm going to say it now. We have a free checklist for land buyers. In the description, just in the literally like our process, we try to make it simple. My whole thing is like, how can I make this simple? So we try to make these compelling videos. I hope you guys enjoy these videos. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And click the link, get the free due diligence checklist. And we also have a course. It's like packages everything into a 5-hour video course. It's just like step by step. It took me like so much time to make the course because it was painful, because like it required me to storytell and to show examples at a level of precision that I hadn't really done before. And it took me like 4 or 5 months working with 2 of the folks on my team to actually do that. And like it was like super hard work to make it look as easy and simple as it is. So if you're buying land or planning to buy land, obviously watch the free videos. I'm not trying to sell you this course. You can buy it or not, but if you want to like really get a step-by-step process that you feel really good about following, even with no prior experience, you want to maximize your odds of success. It's the Land Purchase Navigator. I think it's like $197 or something on our website right now. I would definitely check it out. You'll like it. There's nothing like it at any price online, anywhere, at any price. And it's like $197. And it's like really like, I do my best to give you the game on land. And I hope that I've succeeded in doing that. I want you to check out the course if you're interested and give me feedback, because we'll improve it if we need to, but I really like how it came out and I hope you enjoy it too. Now, we bought a portfolio of 7 building lots in also in Bladen County from an attorney. These were all like contiguous building lots. And what was interesting about them is that they had really good soils. And so all of them were individually buildable. But the only challenge, the only caveat to it was that they're non-conforming lots, meaning that the actual building lots here are smaller than the current minimum standards for new building lots for that zoning class. And so what happens is a lot of times older subdivisions, they were sliced up into smaller lots, and like you still have these lots that are grandfathered into like zoning ordinances that require bigger minimums for square footage and road frontage than what the lots actually have. And so that was the case here, but what we found out about the non-conforming lots, and this is true of a lot of them, is that you can still build on them as long as you meet the setbacks. So because we had such spacious area of good soils on these properties, even though they were infill lots, we were able to meet the setbacks and build on each of these 7 homes if we wanted to. So we checked the box, we bought the deal, and then we put it on the market. And actually the listing agent that was helping us sell it, it was like someone that he brought to buy the land who was like familiar with that county. And the buyer like talked to him and he was like, hey, we got an issue with zoning because there's this like zoning provision on non-conforming lots that says if 2 or more adjoining and vacant lots of record are in single ownership at any time after the adoption of this ordinance, and such lots individually have less frontage or area than the minimum requirements of the district in which such a single lot or several lots are located, the lands involved shall be considered to be an undivided parcel for the purposes of this ordinance. So in plain English, what that means is that all the lots were buildable. We got that right. And even though they're grandfathered in, there's no issue having the non-conforming lot because as long as you meet the setbacks, you can build on them. But what we missed is that for the lots, if you own these 7 lots in one owner, if one person owns all these lots together, then what happens is that the non-conforming lots that are next to each other have to be recombined until they meet the setbacks, because no non-conforming lot that's next to another non-conforming lot will be allowed to stand. And so what happened is, instead of having 7 separate building lots, we only had 3. And this is rule number 7, guys, which is know your zoning. When you go through zoning, what you want to know is that there's a zoning district and a table of permitted uses, which describe what you can build on the property. Also the setbacks, basically the distance inside of the boundary lines where you're not able to build, as well as the dimensional requirements for new building lots, the minor subdivide ordinance. But what's funny is like for non-conforming lots, we just made a mistake here. We were very experienced. We've been doing this for so long and it was so crazy we missed this. because this was like a provision about non-conforming lots that like we had never seen before or since. And so if you have a non-conforming lot, even if it's grandfathered in and you can build if you meet the setbacks, if you're buying a bundle of lots together, and even if you're not, you really want to go and read the fine print, go through the zoning, read and make sure you can spend the time to understand the zoning in detail, because knowing your zoning, that's the 7th rule of buying land. Now let's talk about this property. There's 2 adjacent building lots. These are in a subdivision in Fulton County, Georgia, which is Atlanta, just kind of like on the exterior of the city of Atlanta. And they were listed for something like, I don't know, like 150 grand. And we ended up getting them under contract at like 50K, which is kind of a red flag to a degree. And when we ended up doing due diligence, it looks like when you can see into the property from street view, it almost looks like there's like wetlands vegetation. There's like some ferns and shrubs. It looks like the soils are wet. And it looks like the way that there's drainage, like there's kind of like wetlands and wet soil mapped in the immediate area around the property. And so we had questions about, hey, like, are there wetlands here? Is this buildable? And so we had to go out and get a soil scientist to go look at the property to make sure. And we almost did. We were going to. But then the other thing was that, like, it's also in a flood zone. But what's good is that when we looked at the flood zone, it was in the 500-year flood. And the 500-year flood, it's like statistically once in every 500 years, the flood will actually occur. And, so it's relatively unlikely. And the 100-year flood is a more common flood event. It's a narrower mapped area. But the 100-year flood is really where the regulations come into play. And the 500-year flood is typically in a lot of jurisdictions, there are no regulations. And most of the places we've bought land, when you talk to the floodplain administrator, when you have a 500-year floodplain, there's no regs. So if you're only building in the 500-year flood, in many cases, you're not going to have to deal with any of the floodplain ordinances and floodplain regulations. So in this case, though, it looked kind of weird because, we looked and saw that maybe like when you follow the flood map, it kind of looked like in that 500-year flood, like there wasn't a lot of construction, even though like there probably should be if our assumptions were correct. And so we called the county zone or the city zoning and then the floodplain administrator. And they were like, oh no, the 500-year flood's fine. It's not a big deal. You can build. You just need to get like a flood. You need to get a certification. You need to get like, base flood elevation certificate. You need to just go to the office, come down to the office in person, get an affidavit, make sure an engineer can go out to the property, make sure that the property is buildable, and make sure that you have a flood technician on board. So it was all this stuff where like it was like super onerous. Like it's like Atlanta. Like they just have like way too many like local laws and rules to the detriment of like the real estate market. And to the detriment of the local economy because it constrains housing, which means that housing's less affordable for everyone. And it was funny because like we found that out quickly because the 8th rule of buying land is follow the flood maps. And what I mean by that is that when you have a local like flood ordinance, doesn't mean that you can't build in the flood zone. Doesn't mean that flood zone property is bad. I mean, there's a lot of news headlines about the insurance situation for land in Florida. I get all that. I bought and sold land in Florida with floodplain. I get that too. But the hard reality is that like some of the best land in the world is in a floodplain. If you doubt me, like go to the beach, look around. Do you want to own those homes? If you could own those properties, would you? If you could live in a house in Venice, California, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, would that be fine with you? Guys, flood zones aren't intrinsically bad. It's just a variable. To understand what I mean by follow the flood map, just go to a property that has a flood zone on it, zoom out and actually follow that map. Because what you want to find out, it's not like what the regulations are, what the base flood elevation is. You want to know all that. But you also want to know the broader context of when you follow the flood map, are people actually building in this flood zone? Because when people are building in a flood zone, it's an indication that the cost of managing the regulations for that flood zone are low enough relative to the value of land and the demand for housing that it's actually worthwhile. And when you follow the flood maps, and even in a 500-year flood scenario like this one, nobody's building, there's a reason that nobody's building. So the best way to get a gauge on how bad the floodplain is to follow it and use that as a rule of thumb to know whether other people in similar situations are going to buy land similar to yours. We passed on that deal because we couldn't sell it for what we paid. We paid for it even if we bought it for a third of what it was listed for. Man, this is a 2-acre lot near and dear to my heart. Oh man, what a property. This is kind of in like a subdivision called Mount Vernon Estates. It used to have this like really nice pond behind it, but the dam broke in the subdivision and nobody like banded together to repair it. And so I guess the pond like drained a little bit. So it's kind of like marshy, like swampland, which like, yeah, I mean, it's not so bad. But the idea is like, we had a lot of environmental issues on this one. And a lot of what we had to find out is like, do we even have the setbacks to put a septic system and a nice home on this property? And like in that subdivision, what we ended up finding out was that you have like there's no HOA, but there are covenants. And in the covenants, you have like a series of rules of like the type of land that you can and cannot, or the type of home that you can and can't put on that land. So there's some of the subdivision rules are like residential only land use is in the covenants of this subdivision. You know, residential only, so like no commercial or no home office stuff. Also, you can't put a mobile home, no temporary structures. And then you have to build stick built or brick. And then the minimum dwelling size is 1,500 square feet, which is like in theory fine, but there's a lot of homes going up that are like 1,000, even like 800 square feet, 1,200 square feet. So you can't do that. And yeah, there's just like all these rules. And we're like, it's fine. We bought it at 26K, trying to flip it, trying to sell it at like 55, 60. There's plenty of evidence to the effect that we could do that because there were comps in the area that suggested a price point in the 50s or 60s. But it didn't really sell that quickly at that price. And we were just like waiting a while on the market, kept cutting price, waiting and waiting. It took like the better part of 2 years to sell. When it sold at like 33,900. There was no money made on this property. And like it was kind of a dice roll. It definitely could have sold for more. Even in hindsight, like it should have. I don't know exactly what went wrong, but I do know the 9th rule of buying land, which is more rules, fewer buyers. The issue there is that when you have a property that you're buying in an HOA or a neighborhood association, they just like make rules. Rules are fine, you know, rules that keep us safe, you know, like having some guardrails are fine, but there's already a lot of them through zoning. And so when you layer on more and more rules on a piece of land, what you can and can't do, you can't do this, you have to build that type of home, this minimum square foot, there's architectural committee approval, rules. There's just fewer buyers, you know, and that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of buyers. It doesn't mean you can't buy and you shouldn't buy HOA land. You just want to be aware. It's kind of like a speed bump. You want to stop and be like, okay, like if I had to sell this thing, like what would that look like on the other side? Like who's the buyer here? And like, what's it really worth? What are comps in the subdivision trading for? Because more rules, fewer buyers. There's just fewer people that want to buy land with more rules. And so when you, you know, just go through, comb through and look, but I'll tell you, like mainly we try to avoid land with HOAs and covenants. But like, dude, there's a lot of, I've bought and sold HOA property that I love and would do again. Like, dude, there's great HOA land. Like there's no issue with it intrinsically. It's just one variable. So just understand that when you layer on rules, especially that come with a dollar sign of like HOA fees, you know, impact fees, you know, transfer fees from the HOA. When you buy or sell land or homes in the HOA, there's another fee or special assessments. And then there's more rules. And there's meetings to discuss the rules. It's just not going to be for everybody. Doesn't mean it's not for you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy that land or buy that home. But just like know that there's fewer buyers on the other side. All right. Look at this. Look at this property. It's a 2-acre property that it's in St. Paul's, North Carolina. And it's got like a train track behind it, which I'm not like too wild about. But I'm going to take a little water break. This is what happens when you talk for an hour straight. You got to hydrate, especially when it's hot out. This property, it's like so good though. It's got like trains in the back, but that's a freight line. It's not a passenger line, so it's not very active. I think it's like Norfolk Southern is what we found out. And so basically on this one, like we ended up buying it, but the person we bought it from, she has like a nephew that lived in the home immediately next door to us, who was like psycho. And when we like sent people out to take photos and we like looked at the property, he would like come out of his house and like yell at everyone and like threaten them, like threaten to like beat them up for like being there, because he said it was his land. And the context of it is like, I guess like the aunt like gave him a chance to buy it and he was all talk. He didn't put the money up. And so she sold to us, even though like she gave him every opportunity and probably like a good deal too, or like a great deal. And like he knows it's not his land, but he was just like psychotically like yelling at people and like threatening them. My soil scientist, who's like a tough guy, like he's no pushover, and he's like a respectful guy. He's like, get the fuck off the property, like I own this, you know. So that was not good. We ended up buying it, and when we bought that land, you know, we put it up on the market, and when we put it on the market, it actually went under contract very fast, because it's a property that it's like flat and cleared up front. It's a very obvious site plan. And it's really good for manufactured housing. So you could put a manufactured home there, and it's just good. It's just like strangely like a really frictionless site plan. It's a nice, pretty piece of land, even with its imperfections. When we had it listed on the market, the neighbor like kept like threatening people. And I was like at a certain point, I was like, damn, like maybe this is like a reflection on the land, because ultimately, even if it's a good property, like the fact that the neighbor's like this crazy, he's not going anywhere. He's like dug in for life here, like permanently. So I'm thinking like maybe it's not that good. And we actually had a buyer go out who ended up putting an offer in, and put it under contract. She was like doing a final walkthrough with her husband. It's like a super innocent, like non-threatening, like young family who like lived in the area. And they were like verbally assaulted by this guy, with the agent there. He's like, yeah, I own this land, get out, you know. They're like, no, like there's like, we like got it surveyed. There's like, no, there's like flat, it's like not your land. He's like, no. He was like walking past the property line. The agent called me and she was like, they're good, it's fine. They'll do it. Like, it's all bark, there's no bite here. They know it's good, they're gonna buy the land. And when they buy and put up a home, like they'll just call the cops. Like, he's a weirdo, like he has no leg to stand on. Guys, the 10th rule is that good land attracts nosy neighbors. It's just the reality, because when you have nosy neighbors or crazy neighbors, like crazy neighbors don't pretend to own land that's like a toxic waste dump or like some Superfund site or some property that's like wasteland that can't be built on, that no one cares about. No crazy neighbors are going to pretend to own bad land. So the whole thing is that like good land attracts nosy neighbors, and as high up in the market as you want to go, that's true. You think that like in like Malibu, or like you think in like Beverly Hills, that you don't have crazy neighbors in those like in those neighborhoods up there with the mansions and the hedges. You think there aren't crazy neighbors in those neighborhoods? You're just out of your mind. Like, there's crazy neighbors like every other house. It's like, hey, like, who was that? What truck was that out front? Who parked there? Were they invited? They stayed out there for 30. It's like, dude, they have like binoculars. Like, it's like their whole life. It's like a central theme of their life is like being some like unofficial guardian of the neighborhood. And they do it because it's good property. And so when you have these types of neighbors, take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, like really sketchy neighborhoods with really sketchy territorial neighbors, in theory, like that wouldn't be good. But by and large, if you have a good piece of land and there's just a crazy neighbor named Larry who's like giving folks a hard time, not only is it probably fine, but it's like usually a good indication that that land is going to be good for you. But when you buy it, or when you put an offer in to buy that land, the thing is, you got to know what that land's actually worth. This could be the subject of our next video on our channel. I want you to check this video out. It's called How the Market Sets the Price for Land. I think you're really going to enjoy this video, and I hope you enjoyed this one too.